Hello, yes, a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening to you, however you may be listening and wherever you may be listening. This is the third episode of the Baldwin Sports Media NFL podcast. And as I like to say at the start of every episode, for those of you who are new, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for discovering us. And for those of you who are back and returning listeners, then thank you very much for coming back and obviously enjoying what you like and what you listen to. And coming back is very much appreciated as we start off on this new venture. Don't forget that wherever you are listening to this, you can like, you can subscribe, you can follow whatever platform it is that you are listening on. We are on a wide variety of platforms. In fact, just on that note, I should probably apologise for last week. There were some technical issues behind the scenes that meant that I believe it was Spotify. We had to go out a couple of days late. We do record these all on Monday evenings, but depending on how long it takes to get onto your chosen platform of choice, then it's going to take a bit, but there were just some technical difficulties behind the scenes last week. So Spotify took a bit longer to get up. I believe everyone else was pretty much straightforward on Monday night, Tuesday morning, but hopefully we've got it all sorted, so there shouldn't be any more problems as we move forward into what is, for some people, the highlight of the NFL year. There are people in the NFL media who make their jobs around the NFL draft and only really appear around February to April time. So this is a very exciting part of the year. I'm certainly very excited about a lot of what's going on in the draft. There's still a lot that's really left to be unsolved apart from the number one pick. Everyone knows what's going on about that, and we will be talking about the draft moving forward in subjects 2 and 3 of our 4 subjects tonight. But we're going to start off with something that very much I was going to term this as an off the field issue, but technically it's not even an on the field issue. It's a field issue. And that is the situation surrounding the Kansas City Chiefs and their potential, we sort of say it's potentially because it is still very much the early stages, but their potential move away from Arrowhead Stadium. Now, for those of you who may have missed it, last week there was a vote put to the people of Jackson County, Missouri, which is the county in which the Kansas City Chiefs play. It is part of that big sporting complex. For those of you who follow baseball as well, it's where the Kansas City Royals have their team as well, their stadium, and the Kansas City Chiefs practice facility as well. So basically the heart and soul of Kansas City sports is within that complex. However, the voters were basically asked whether or not an extra sales tax of, I believe I saw some report somewhere, 3/8 of a cent, if they were going to, if they would accept that to have a sales tax, that would then fund some renovations to the stadium, and then that will allow the Kansas City Chiefs to play at Arrowhead Stadium, moving forward after they, make some tweaks. There's always one stadium story, usually, or at least it feels like one stadium story every year when it comes to the NFL, whether it be someone moving stadium or a team changes the sponsor of the stadium, or there's some grand new design or big addition. You think of the Jacksonville Jaguars when they introduced the big jumbotron or the pool or whatever. There's always one stadium, and it looks as if the NFL stadium story this year is going to surround the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, I don't think this is necessarily going to be that big of a deal. I understand that, Arrowhead is one of the most historic and, renowned stadiums in the NFL. I don't quite put it in the same stratosphere of like the Lambeau Fields or your Soldier Fields, for instance, in terms of the old school stadium, which, if memory serves me correctly off the top of my head, those are the two oldest, and those are really two of the only old stadiums that we think of. A lot of them were done in the move around through the 80s and 90s with the cookie cutters, and then you've got the new stadiums of the 2000s, and now you've got the likes of the Los Angeles Chargers and the Los Angeles Rams with SoFi, and Minneapolis with the Minnesota Vikings rather with US Bank stadiums. All these shiny new stadiums. There are the few outliers, and Arrowhead is one of them. It is a historic stadium, having been built in 1972. Just a quick look at Wikipedia tells me that, but it doesn't quite have the same aura, if you will, as a Green Bay, as a Lambeau Field in Green Bay or a Soldier Field in Chicago. But at the same time, I do think this is going to be a very big moment for the Kansas City Chiefs moving stadium. But I don't think in terms of big impact on the NFL, it's going to have them, because I still don't see them leaving Kansas City. Now, again, for those of you who don't really know the geography of Kansas City, it stretches across 2 states. The metropolitan area of Kansas City contains bits of the state of Kansas and bits of Missouri, which does leave you in the situation where Donald Trump said a couple of years ago that the Kansas City Chiefs are bringing the Super Bowl back to Kansas when technically, when they play in Missouri. So a bit of a gaffe, but if you're not geography educated, I didn't know this for a couple of years, but yeah, they play in Missouri, but it is still part of the Kansas City metropolitan area. So they do have a lot of wiggle room when it comes to where they can put their stadium, because they can work within the Kansas City region, much in the same way the New York Giants and the New York Jets can play in New Jersey but still call themselves New York, because yes, they start off in New York, but because they are so close to the city, they still get to brand themselves as New York rather than the New Jersey Jets and Giants. So I don't think it's going to be as big as, we saw the mayor of Dallas talking about bringing them back to Dallas, because that's where they started off as a franchise. They were the Dallas Texans back in back when they first formed. I don't see them moving that far away. B, I don't see Jerry Jones being willing to share a market with the Kansas City Chiefs. I think Dallas is with a big population, it can sustain 2 franchises. I firmly believe that, but I do not see in any way, shape, or form that Jerry Jones is going to split half of North Texas with the Kansas City Chiefs. They couldn't even call themselves the Dallas Texans anymore because Houston's got that moniker. But whatever team they would have been, Jerry Jones was never going to give that up. So I don't see them moving to Dallas. I don't see them moving anywhere big. We always talk about the Jaguars, for instance. Oh, they're going to move to London in some day. And there's always the big cities that are always seen as potential venues for, like Las Vegas was for so many years, that whoever's going to be moving is either going to be London or Las Vegas or even Los Angeles before that, before the Rams moved back and the Chargers moved back. So I don't see it being any grand move there. I do think they are going to stay within the Kansas City area, because if you look at the geography of NFL teams, and I don't want this to turn into a geography lesson, but they have pretty much sewn up those Midwestern states with the state of Kansas and the state of Missouri and bits of Nebraska and bits of Iowa and bits of Arkansas and bits of Oklahoma. So they have a lot of standing in that region. If you were to move them to anywhere else, there's nowhere that they would be that would sort of make them a new team, as it were. If they move to Salt Lake City, you're moving into Utah, which is pretty much split between in terms of geography at least, between the Denver Broncos and the Las Vegas Raiders. So you can't really put them in Salt Lake. Portland, Oregon is put as a team, but then that's a pretty big Seattle Seahawks territory. Anywhere else, wherever else is always sort of mentioned. Louisville is mentioned as a potential move. That's into Kentucky. That's probably moving into the Titans and the Bengals territory. So really, the only option for the Kansas City Chiefs is to stay within Kansas City. And I think they will. Again, they are too established in that part of the country that I don't see them being the ones to make the big move to one of the new markets or anything like that. So San Antonio again is always mentioned as a possible option. Again, for the same reason, I don't see Jerry Jones and the Cowboys or the Houston Texans being willing to give up more of the state of Texas to the Kansas City Chiefs. So I don't think that's happening. I think they are going to stay within Kansas City. It may be to the state of Kansas. There will be some wiggle room. There will be some county out there that is willing to take them on and will be willing to give them the tax breaks that they want, because we know what football teams do to market and the finances of cities. So there will be options for them. I just don't see them having to go very far afield in order to get them. Right, enough with the geography and the tax laws, because I'm pretty sure that's not what you came to tune into, but although I do hope you enjoyed that segment. And as I said, we are going to be moving on to the draft. And one of the big stories that has come out over the weekend is the news about Drake Maye, who for a while was seen as the slam dunk number 2 quarterback. Again, for the past couple of years, it's been established that Caleb Williams was going number 1, again, for a number of years. At the start of last season, it was who's going to be in the Caleb Williams sweepstakes. And then after that is who's going to be number 2. And again, it was established for a while that Drake Maye was that number 2. But as is the case with college football, there are always these players that just come out of nowhere and give you food for thought. You know, who'd have thought at the start of last year that Jaden Daniels would be considered this high up as a potential number 2 quarterback? Who'd have thought that, you know, JJ McCarthy after this year is now being talked about as a top 5 quarterback potentially? You know, the best example I always think of is Cam Newton. Who'd have thought that the year he started with Auburn before they won the national championship, he was going to go number 1? You know, he just come out of junior college after being a backup. I don't even think he was backup. I think he was 3rd string off the top of my head to Tim Tebow at Florida. But then that incredible year, he moved himself to number 1. This always happens. But the story of Drake Maye is very much an interesting one. But the main news that comes out of this weekend comes from the mouth of Merrill Hodge, who's, you know, a great for whoever he goes on. I know he does work with the ESPN, but he sort of flits around and offers his services elsewhere. But brilliant analyst. And he has come up with some rather damning words when it comes to Drake Maye. And this was him speaking to WCCO, which is the CBS affiliate in Minnesota. And I think that's important to note because the Minnesota Vikings are in that conversation for a quarterback. You know, ever since Kirk Cousins left, there may have been some idea of, are they going to maybe take someone later in the draft to develop under Kirk Cousins, or would they go somewhere else? But now that they are sans quarterback, I know they have Sam Darnold, but they are firmly in that discussion, and a lot of people are talking, if you look at mock drafts, there is that talk that they are going to jump up into that top 5 range to grab a quarterback, and Drake Maye, again, could potentially be one of them. But Merrill Hodge, again, speaking to WCCO, said this: Drake Maye is the kind of player that will get you fired. Especially if you draft him in the top 5 or top 3, he's going to get you fired. I studied him for 2 years. I watched every one of his games last year. His last game for North Carolina was probably the most embarrassing display I've seen from a guy who is supposed to be an elite franchise quarterback. He's erratic. He's everywhere. Now, I think this is important because, again, there's a lot of hype surrounding quarterbacks, and there will always be some naysayers regardless of whatever. But I saw a lot of people, when I saw this quote being mentioned, Merrill Hodge was, again, not saying he was the only one, but he was a pretty vocal advocate against Johnny Manziel. And when you make the comparison, when you look at those words, erratic and he's everywhere, was that not one of the main complaints about Johnny Manziel when he was coming out of college? Again, no one could dispute he was a great player in college, but what's that going to equate to at the pro level? I am a Drake Maye fan personally. I think he deserves to be in that top 5 argument. You know, if you look at the numbers he put up in college, which for reference, in his 2 years as a starter, we'll take out the first year when he was just a backup, but 4,321 yards in his first year, 3,608 in his second, 38 touchdowns in his first year, 24 touchdowns in his second year, 7 interceptions in his first, 9 interceptions in his second. Yeah, he's a great player. He's someone who, and if you look at his physical stature as well, he's 6'4", he's 230, he's built for the National Football League. There's no concerns about his height like there was with Bryce Young or Kyler Murray, for instance. So I think he does have a lot of potential if he does go to the right system. But I don't know. There's just something about Merrill Hodge and the fact that someone, again, a couple of people pointed out how right he was with Johnny Manziel. And when you hear those words, again, it's not so much that we talk about it's one flaw in his game or one flaw in his attributes. Like I go back to Kenny Pickett, for instance. Everyone said, "Oh, he has small hands." There's nothing, but everyone was talking about the small hands. You can sort of get it around that and pass that off. Or again with Bryce Young, the fact that statement is just so damning on Drake Maye has just made me think twice. And again, it might make a lot of other teams think twice because they will not want to get burned. As he said, as Mira Hodge says, this is a pick that can get you fired if you are picking in the top 5 of the draft, and you miss, especially in this day and age. As a GM or as a head coach, you look at the Vikings. Is Kevin O'Connell on the hot seat this season? I think he is. If they continue to take another step back, if the Vikings do not get this one right, then yeah, there is that potential that Kevin O'Connell will be fired. So whether or not they are going to end up taking Drake Maye as a result, or not taking Drake Maye rather as a result of this, we'll have to wait and see. But it certainly is going to be interesting. But I just thought it was worth noting out that of all the assessments that I've seen of any player in the draft this year, that is probably the most damning that I have seen, and it does have the potential to see someone like Drake Maye drop right out of that top 5 conversation and maybe even out of the top 10. But we shall have to wait and see. And now moving on to the third topic of today, and as I said, it still revolves around the draft, and this one isn't necessarily based around one particular news item or one player. It was sparked off by a couple of tweets today that just got me thinking. But again, I'm gonna name some names. This isn't necessarily about them in particular. It's more about the system. But it's the idea of the top 30 visits. Now, again, this was sparked off by news coming from the NFL insiders like Albert Breer and Adam Schefter and Ian Rappaport, people I have instant notifications on Twitter, especially around this time of year. But it was the news that Texas wide receiver Xavier Worthy and Alabama offensive lineman J.C. Latham are going to be visiting the Bears for a top 30 visit. Which, again, to fill people in, for those who may not know the minutiae of this, a top 30 visit is essentially NFL teams are given 30 players that they can bring in for a variety of activities, be that, just in another chat, or if it be work on the field or chalkboard, well, it's not really chalkboard these days, whiteboard sessions, whatever they decide to do, they are allowed to have 30 players come to the facility to meet and just walk and just go through whatever they deem as an extra step to get to know a person before they pick them in the draft, which is all fine and dandy. Again, you want to get as much detail of these players as possible, which is why I still find it weird that there are players who are willing to miss out on things like the combine and pro days, because you are effectively denying coaches a chance to examine you in some way or see what you can do, and that could hurt rather your draft stock if they think, oh right, we wanted to see this but now we can't. So there's a lot of minutiae into the draft and the workout process. But the idea of the top 30 visit, and the thing that gets me, is announcing the top 30 visits. And in the day of secrecy, I'm wanting to make sure that you keep your draft plans as close to the chest as possible, so you don't. How is it announced that you are bringing in X, Y, and Z for visits? Because you are just giving away who you are looking at or what position you are looking at. And I'm not saying this is necessarily, I'm not going to disparage the likes of the Schefters and the Rappaports and the Breers, because this is their job. This is they get their sources, they get their news from people who say, oh JC Latham is working out for the Bears, and they report it. That's absolutely fine. But I just find it weird that, again, in these days and ages, when you want to keep your plans a secret so that you don't give away, we are looking at, for the sake of argument, the Bears are looking at wide receivers. After they draft Caleb Williams, what position are they going to go for next? We're looking at wide receivers and offensive linemen, for the sake of the argument. That just gives an incentive or gives knowledge to those teams that are, behind them, or even the teams above them, to say, right, we know that the Bears are looking at X, Y, Z. We need to focus on that to make sure that they don't go to that. Whereas if everything was kept secret, it would be, you'd be working on best guesses, which again, you can take educated guesses, but when you're giving away all this sort of information, it just gives away more details that people can then go and use against you. Like, you go back to last year, for instance, and the story that everyone thought that the New York Jets were going to take an offensive lineman to protect Aaron Rodgers. And then the story was that the New England Patriots, or rather the Pittsburgh Steelers, whichever one offered that up first, said, you don't want Aaron Rodgers to be protected. Let us they're gonna get a tackle. Let us jump ahead so we can get that tackle, and you can, the Patriots, you get Aaron Rodgers and a bit of a free hit. Obviously, it never got round to being a free hit because he was injured before he even got to play the Jets or play against the Patriots. But that story sort of gives away idea. And again, if teams didn't give away who they are talking to, then you just kind of have to think it would just make it more of a guessing game, and they might be able to get away with a little bit more rather than seceding to the teams. Right, this is what we do. I just find it weird. Again, this is a plan that this is all methods and tricks that have worked, and it's been established, and it's done throughout every team in the league. So this isn't necessarily picking on the Bears, but I just find it weird that in this day of wanting to keep everything secret, that stuff like this is allowed to get out and be openly public. Again, I don't get it, and hopefully this might be something that I'm not going to say change because it does add some drama, but just something that maybe teams are going to be a little bit more secretive about as we move forward. And speaking of moving forward, we are going to move forward with our final topic of the night. And before we do, I do want to give a shout out to my brother-in-law, Matthew Haas, who suggested this segment. And by the way, as I've said in every episode so far, if you do have any suggestions on topics you want to see discussed on the show, you can reach out on all the social media platforms, which are they're all Baldwin Sports Media. So use that on TikTok, on YouTube, on Twitter, and on Instagram. So if there are any subjects you want to see discussed, then by all means feel free to send them over and we shall discuss them. And he came up with this idea, which, especially during this downtime of the NFL, as I say, it's not proper downtime because we are in the build-up to the draft, but it's not the same as talking through it during the regular season. But just to keep things slightly in the world of sports, and you may sort of know where I'm going with this given the timeline of things and the fact I said slightly in the world of sports, but I do want to touch on what happened at Wrestlemania this weekend. Now, I know that for some of you may not have ever watched wrestling. It's a start I can understand. You may have watched wrestling during the peak days of the Attitude Era. That's when I first got into it. Ducked away and then had a couple of friends at university who liked wrestling and got me back into it. But now I've sort of drifted back away again, just because of timing wise and getting older a bit and finding other things to fill my life. But my word, I do still follow a lot of people who like wrestling, so I see it come across my timeline. And my word, WrestleMania this weekend, there is part of me that is slightly annoyed that I missed it, because it looks as if wrestling is fun again. From Paul Heyman and his Hall of Fame speech on Friday night, to night one with the great story of The Rock coming back, to night two with I saw it come across time, arguably the most exciting 5 minutes of wrestling that I have seen or been informed of, shall we say, over the past couple of years, with The Rock coming back, Seth Rollins. I'm going to name some names here, I'm sure, that will go over people's heads, but feel free to look up on social media just the last 5 minutes of the main event of night two. But Seth Rollins coming back with The Shield, John Cena, then The Rock, then The Undertaker, which many people believe was meant to be for Stone Cold Steve Austin, but things had to change. But much in the same way that you can't help have been not you can't have not ignored really the Caitlin Clark Iowa story. I'm pretty sure if you follow the right people on social media, that you probably saw a little bit of WrestleMania over the weekend as well. And if you did see it, doesn't it make you think there might be something to this? Again, I can't see myself going back into it full time and watching Raw and SmackDown and every pay-per-view, as it was called back in my day. I think it's now a premium live event, I believe. I don't see myself getting back into that level, but it just made you think that wrestling could be back on the rise again. And that night, WrestleMania 40 in Philadelphia, one of the best sporting cities in America, could be the catalyst for it. And I certainly hope it does. Again, I'm not going to follow it, but if you do follow it, then I hope you enjoyed. You probably did enjoy watching it more than I did, because I just saw the clips. You saw the whole thing. But alas, talking about wrestling and the start of a potential new era in wrestling, we can't really talk about the start of anything because we're at the end of this podcast. Again, I thank you very much for tuning in. And as I said a couple of minutes ago, any suggestions for any topic, mainly surrounding the NFL, but if you want to dive into other sports as well, then by all means feel free. I'll do it as the final segment. So feel free to reach out on @Baldwin Sports Media across across Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and Twitter.